Hope you're doing great. Just a second. Just a second. There we go. We got kids just sitting right there, and got some iPad noises going. So I had to make sure. Ben, what's up, my man? Good morning, team. Missed you all. Yeah, Sunday is a weird day. I do feel strange when I'm not doing it, but having a lot of fun with the kids Sunday mornings, so can't. 7, where do I sats? We love sevens. Lucky number 7 today. Beaumatin, good morning, Bitcoiners. B for victory. Good morning. The 4th day of rain for Robert. No fun, Robert. P-Man. Good morning, fine people. Indeed, we are the fine people. Fine people hoax. Heil, Nolan. Thank you, Robert. We are heiling today. Good morning, Enmity. What's up, Enmity? Hope there's no Nazis among us. P-Man. Who knows? Good morning, Christine. Indeed, good morning. What I got here is a confirmation of an incredible and glorious event, the sunrise. It happened. We got a total sunrise. And I've also got confirmation of an incredible and glorious event, which is Bitcoin is running. So all that's left for us to do is have a coffee and talk about what's new. Greetings. What do we got here? From Florida, where Bitcoin is the alligator that bites the central bank. King Mansa Musa. That is a good way to put it. There you go. Bitcoin tribe. Good morning, everyone. Indeed. Good morning. So, as you know, we like to start every day with the fakest news we can find. And boy, oh boy, it can't get better than today. I've said before that you might be getting the best Moscow time ever, but it just keeps getting better. I'm not the one in charge of this, right? So it might sound like I'm changing and recalibrating and trying to hype it up all the time and saying it's getting better, but it really is getting better. This might be the best one we've ever had. So we'll start slow, right? So, the UN week, all week in New York, right? All the UN people there are so important, right? They're so important. And for a while now, I've noticed this trend to try and get more people like Greta, like more young girls, to yell at people and admonish them for not believing the same as them. And they brought this girl. So she, and I have no problem with people dyeing their hair, right? So she dyed half of her hair purple and the other half pink. Pretty cool, right? Just before her UN address. So she comes and gives a UN address, right? And she's from Chile, right? So we're all waiting to hear what the people of Chile have to say about how we should run our lives, right? Because everybody knows it's just the best there, right? They must have the best advice. So she tells us that for those who refuse to yield to the Agenda 2030, she calls it, right? It's no longer a negotiation, she says, right? That's why it's called an agenda and not a wish list. And then she had a little laugh at the end. It's not a negotiation, right? So there you go. That's what you get from this young girl. And the Pope, right? The Pope has urged nations to overcome our paralysis of fear of migrants. You didn't know. If you didn't know, everyone's super afraid of migrants. That's what he's saying, right? Paralysis. But the people who aren't afraid, right? They're the smart people, right? How do we know that the smart people aren't afraid? Well, the University of Minnesota brought this to us, and I believe this came as a user contribution Moscow time. Here's their actual headline: smart people first in line for COVID-19 vaccine. Study suggests. It's the smart people, right? It's the same smart people they're not afraid of immigrants, right? And they're not negotiating either, right? It's just an agenda. You got to listen. This one's great, right? This one almost makes the mind boggle because and by the way, almost everything we're going to be talking about today goes back to Moscow time. Moscow time is so fertile today that it can actually be the references that we're going to use for the rest of this morning breakup. So here's an actual headline from the Washington Post. All right, ready? Misinformation research is buckling under GOP legal attacks. An escalating campaign has cast a pall over programs that study political disinformation and the quality of medical information online, right? So academics, universities, and government agencies are overhauling or ending research programs designed to counter the spread of online misinformation amid a legal campaign from conservative politicians and activists to accuse them of colluding with tech companies to censor right-wing views. That's an actual headline today. In other news, right? Did you hear about this one? Russell Brand has attacked the British government, right? This is from NBC, right? Russell Brand attacks, because he's a country, right? Attacks the British government and social media platforms for shutting down his ability to make money from his accounts in his first public comments following the publication of multiple sex abuse allegations against him. Russell Brand speaks for the first time since sexual assault allegations, right? He attacks, right? So all of the misinformation people have let us know that he attacks, right? And that the smart ones are getting the vaccines first, and that, of course, only the stupid people are afraid of immigrants, and of course, they're not negotiating. It's not a wish list, right? So we got more. This one, 60 Minutes. This happened last night. 60 Minutes, there was a time when 60 Minutes was the biggest news program in all of American media, in the entire landscape, right? So they did a bit of research yesterday. They actually ran a show. This is their headline. 60 Minutes discovered the U.S. is financing more than weapons in Ukraine. The government is buying seeds, fertilizers for farmers, paying the salaries of 57,000 first responders, and subsidizing small businesses. It's really happening. Now, I got a few headlines out of Canada, right? Because we saw, I don't know if you heard what happened in Canada yesterday. We're going to talk about it. It's our last Moscow time of the morning. This one's pretty good, right? This is from the Toronto Sun. Did not see that coming. Did not see that coming, right? From Politico, Nazi-linked veteran receives standing ovation during Zelensky's Canada visit. You can't get better than that. I'll never have better headlines from Moscow time than that Politico one, right? Never. It's not possible, right? It's pretty amazing. So I have a few reactions. First of all, let's hear from the news yesterday before everyone found out that Trudeau brought a Nazi to the Canadian Parliament, right? So just before Trudeau, if you haven't heard the news, Trudeau brought some guy who's like, he apparently served in the Ukraine battalion, but that's fake. It was always an SS thing that just rebranded into Ukraine. So no one, I guess, did their research. They brought this guy to Parliament, and then the speaker said, everyone clap for the guy up there. He's 98 years old. It's hard to find a Nazi still alive, right? There's only like a handful of them left, but they found this guy, 98. He's been living in Canada the whole time. And what did he get? He got a tear-filled standing ovation from the crowd. It really hurt. It really touched him. You could see this Nazi up there going, oh, it's so nice. I'm 100 years old, and they're finally recognizing me, right? And just before that, the Canadian Prime Minister had said that Canada reaffirms our unwavering support for Ukraine for as long as it takes, right? So even if they have to go with the Nazis, they're there, unwavering, right? Nazis and all. So they bring them there. They go crazy. But now, the best part of it, so they cheer him on, they cheer the Nazi on, right? So the Canadian Parliament invites a fella, right? And they didn't do any research, and they find out the whole place goes crazy. You got Zelensky giving him a fist pump, right? Zelensky's in the room next to Trudeau, and they're both clapping for the Nazi, right? He's crying. People love it, right? Now, we found out, so even Politico knows it's a Nazi. Everyone finding out, a Jewish newspaper said, wait a minute here. This Ukraine division was always a propaganda smokescreen to hide Nazis who had some involvement in Ukraine, and they just took the Ukrainian name, but they were always German, they were always SS, and they were always Nazis, right? So this guy is one of the few who made it through the cracks and actually got to live his whole life as a Nazi in exile in Canada. And what is his reward? It's like the best thing Canadians can hope for. He gets to go to the parliamentary gallery, and everyone says, oh, what a beautiful Nazi this was. What a great Nazi he was. He was one of our favorite Nazis ever, right? So now it's funny because I was called a terrorist by Canada a couple years ago. And it was for being a Bitcoiner, right? So they called me a terrorist a couple of years ago for being a Bitcoiner. And one of the ways they were able to make the terrorist thing stick so that they could use martial law, declare me a terrorist, and so after whatever else we were doing, right? So one of the things was there was a guy. So imagine this is the story they're sticking with, right? A guy showed up to a truckers' protest in Ottawa wearing a mask. First of all, who in the protest was wearing a mask? How many people who were there to protest against masks do you think were wearing masks who were legitimate, right? So this guy shows up in the 2022 trucker protest with a mask on, like an idiot, right? And at a protest against masks and mask mandate and vaccine mandates. It wasn't just the mask, but he's wearing a mask, and I'm telling you, no one else was. And of course, he's got a Nazi flag, right? But he won't take his mask off. He gets kicked out of the crowd because everyone knows what's going on. Canadians had seen the tactics used in Trump rallies, right? So in Trump rallies, what was happening was people would come in with Confederate flags and other things, and they would go right in front of a camera to make it look like, oh, they're drawing all these Confederate sympathizers for the flag. It's the fine people thing again. And every single time, the conservatives at the Trump rally learned that these people were plants and that they had to be shooed out of the place. So they had learned it. So the Canadians had learned this tactic. So by the time it came to Canada, and they tried to put this plant in with a Nazi flag, waving a Nazi flag with the protesters, they knew, and they shoot him out of there. He was there for 5 minutes. They got a picture, and that was it, right? People hated this guy so much. So Maxime Bernier, Maxime Bernier runs a political party in Canada. I've known him for years. In some ways, his fateful mistake. So he's a fine guy. I've known him for a lot longer than early Bitcoin days, for example. But I spent about 2 hours with him in 2016 as he was running for the leadership of the Conservative Party, which Pierre Poilievre now has. And I told him to go all in on Bitcoin. We spent 2 hours with a Bitcoin strategy, and I was telling him, just take campaign donations. And even if you don't get them, they're going to freak out. The elections monitor people will freak out. They'll make a big issue, and all these Bitcoiners will come and help you once they single you out. And he decided not to do it. And he ended up losing by 1 vote. They picked a really, really stupid guy to run against Trudeau last time. No hope in hell to win. I knew it from the start. This guy was not going to win. He was like a smiley guy who was going to be nicer. It's like that whole, how like with Trump now, people thought DeSantis, because he was like nicer, that it would be the way to go, right? You just have to tone down on the meanness, and then you'll be okay. So that was the argument for having this guy, and Bernier was too mean. Right, he was not sensitive enough. So they chose a really sensitive loser, and he got wiped out by Trudeau. It wasn't even close, right? So, so Maxime Bernier is also an idiot for not becoming a Bitcoiner years ago, because he's one of these supposed libertarians and all that. So we don't want to give him too much credit here, even though I still like the guy, right? I still like him, but he had a chance to make Canada a Bitcoin country in 2016. And refused, and he would have won the 2019 election had he listened to me. He would have won, because the 1 vote. Anyway, the calculus was simple. The way the primary system works in Canada is the amount of and the primaries are different for each party, just like in the United States. But the Conservatives do a very simple way, right? Every county, every riding, which is more or less every congressional seat, right, gets 10 points. So every congressional seat gets 10 points. And those are delegates. So they can bring 10 delegates. Each one of them gets a vote. And those delegates vote in the end for the leader. So there's, 400 counties or whatever, 400 Congress people. Each seat, whether you own it or not as a party, it doesn't matter. It's just every county in Canada gets 10 votes and 10 delegates. And so my argument was simple, right? That the urban delegates, who no one even bothers getting because there's not a lot of urban support for the Conservative Party in Canada. It's all rural and Western mostly. So those delegates everyone fights over, and they're hard to get, but it doesn't make a difference. Every delegate is worth the same. So if you can go into cities and gather some delegates, you're going to win. So my argument with him was simple. It was just get the delegates out of the cities who are Bitcoiners. They won't come to conservative things otherwise, but if you show an appetite for Bitcoin, they're going to run in. He said, I don't know. Imagine 2016, he's telling me this, right? So he fucked up big time, right? He would have been the Prime Minister of Canada by a mile had he listened to me, by a mile. Now, he's been a big help to me in my life. Totally like the guy. Think he's great, right? But now in Canada, they've got Pierre Poilievre, who is a Bitcoiner. So we don't have to worry about it anymore. And I don't think Bernier is ever going to make it. He could have done it, but he won't make it. But here's what he says, right? All that long story just to get to this thing about the convoy. He goes, when one provocateur with a Nazi flag appeared at the Freedom Convoy, the lying mainstream media used this as proof that the protesters were white supremacists and extremists. Are they now going to do the federal government that invited an actual Nazi into parliament? It's pretty good, right? Cernovich says, Canada gave Russia irrefutable proof that the West's goal is the genocide of ethnic Russians. That was obvious to me. I've never seen such open hatred for a group of people in my life. Now, With Canada hosting World War II Nazi SS members, it's undeniable. This is so good. This is also good. Armchair warlord. This war is basically encapsulated by the Nazi parliament, by the Canadian parliament giving a standing ovation to a Nazi. Congratulations, you just validated every single claim the Russians have made about Ukrainian Nazism. Want to feel clean again because there's this Jewish guy who went there? Do you know how many Jewish people were in the audience? I'm sorry to laugh, but it's pretty funny. Do you know how many Jewish people were in the audience who found out later that they were cheering on a Nazi? How many? Just, yeah, way to go, Nazis. You're great. You made it almost 100 years old, Nazi. You're the best, right? So this guy, Jason Cherniak, who would vote to strip you of your rights in 2 seconds. So don't feel that much sympathy for this guy. So he's there. He's a total libtard, right? He's there. And he's wondering, I feel dirty, right? What are you going to do to make this better? What are you going to do to make it better? How are you going to make me feel clean again, right? But hey, what are you going to do? But the Viva Fry, someone I went to law school with, who actually ran for Maxime Bernier in his own party, the People's Party of Canada, said, it's fun watching all the Canadian MPs who gleefully cheered a Nazi soldier now jumping ship, blaming Justin Trudeau, now ironically saying, we didn't know. We didn't know. Thank you for confirming that you don't know about the regime that you are currently supporting with our tax dollars for as long as it takes. He just said for as long as it takes, right? You just red pill the country and possibly the world, you corrupt dummies, is what he says. So remember, I've mentioned this many times. I made a prediction in 2014, and everyone who I know heard it. I told everyone who was around that this was going to be the case. I said, I think Trudeau can win. He can become the prime minister, right? But what he's going to win is going to be something much more amazing than just the prime ministership. I predicted he would be the end of all liberal political ideology thought. He would become such a punchline, a joke, that he would destroy what we understood as liberalism over the past 80 years. He would be such a failure that it would be world changing. It would be epic in scope. The failure would be so complete and so thorough that it could change people's minds about liberalism and the world and completely change the polarity of politics. That's how much of an epic loser he could be. And I said to everyone, we got to get him in. He just has to get in. Now he gets in, right? And there's all kinds of rumors of cheating and all this great stuff, right? So he's in and he keeps screwing up. He does martial law. He makes, a third of the country into terrorists. Just boom, right? I'm a terrorist. You're a terrorist. We're all terrorists. Now, when I introduce myself in Canada, I'm not kidding. I tell people all the time, well, people ask me, why are you living in Vermont and Barbados? Like, what's going on? I don't know. I'll say, well, I was made a terrorist here, so I don't really want to make my life in Canada anymore. I come to eat your food and hang out and enjoy your nice stuff, but I can't take this place seriously. Like, they made me a terrorist. Me, I'm a terrorist. Bin Laden, right? So there you go. Speaking of that whole frame, remember what the sovereign individual predicted, right? And it's what I mentioned before, that everyone would be Bin Laden, that individuals would be targeted for the same kind of nation state retribution that only other nation states used to get previous to this change and this turning. So I've often showed sympathy to this point of view because it happened to me. I got turned into an actual terrorist, right? So I'll often mention that how that thing happened and how it changed people's minds and how we ended up in that position is hilarious. But when you see what's happening to Russell Brand, they've gone full circle. Now a human is attacking a nation state. Remember what the headline that the NBC, which if you listen to Glenn Greenwald, and we're going to talk about that more today because Mike Benz actually brings the history of NBC to the forefront right now, and we're going to be talking about it. Remember, the headline is that Russell Brand attacks the British government. Russell Brand, a human being, a somewhat comedic talking head whose famous movies include Forgetting Sarah Marshall, attacked the British government, right? He attacked it, right? That's the frame. He attacked it, right? So there you go. With Canada and the stuff for as long as it takes. Now go back to what remember what Mike Benz was saying about or I'll just read some of these quotes for a second. Yeah, P-Man Polliver is not necessarily to be trusted, by the way. Yeah. Now, what I will say is that Polliver is not, I wouldn't go so far as to say he's turned his back on Bitcoin. Okay. I wouldn't go so far as to say that. What I noticed was the minute he was the minute he ascended to being the leader of the party and the next candidate against Trudeau in the election, I noticed right away that the attack ads went straight to Bitcoin, crypto, and went straight to crypto, right? And so I think he just calmed down because of the price right now, and he's vulnerable and all of these things. What I will say in his defense, right, is that he admires the leader that I worked for, Stephen Harper, very, very much, right? So he's a big fan of Stephen Harper, the former Canadian Prime Minister. And I think in some ways he'll always sort of listen to him. There is a bit of a father-son situation happening there. Or at least, elder statesmen who you respect. So Pierre Polliver, for most of his career previous to this, when I was working in Parliament, was the parliamentary spokesperson for the Prime Minister. And what that means is, so in our system, in the Canadian system, for you Americans, the president has to sometimes, we don't have a president, but the leader, the prime minister, is just a congressman also, right? And sometimes they have to sit as a congressman in their chair with other congressmen. There's a special chair that only the prime minister sits in. It's just like any other. It's just in the middle of a row, at the front row. Like it's nothing special, right? But they're just a congressman like anyone else, and they sit in this chair, and then the opposition sits on the other side in a chair so they can face each other. Now, of course, the prime minister is also the prime minister, so they can't go to the Congress every day, right? They'll be gone for a week, they'll be gone for 2 weeks, they travel all around the world. But they do have to come to this one time called question period, which is not every day, but if they're in town, they come to this thing called question period. It's an hour at lunchtime. It's just theater. They're just yelling at each other. None of it's real. You get a question, you dodge a question, whatever. But for years, whenever Harper wasn't out, Polliver was the stand-in. So you don't get another seat, but someone will ask the prime minister a question, and then every single time Pierre Polliver would stand up and answer it. So what that meant is that he had to be briefed and coordinate these talking points and all that with the prime minister for a long time. So they had a very close working and personal relationship. Now, what I know is that Harper has become a major Bitcoiner, right? So that if you didn't know, he was already interested years ago, right? He was not zero. But he was still prime minister and had other things to do. Now, his son, Ben Harper, is working for Luxor. He's a Bitcoin fanatic. He is a Bitcoin maximalist. He's only 23, 24 years old, maybe. I remember throwing the football on the yard. I asked him, I saw him in a conference, and I said, do you remember throwing any, probably happened a lot where staffers came over. But I went over to the prime minister's house for a barbecue the summer he was elected, the summer of 2006. And the boy was, he's 23, 24. That's, almost 20 years ago. So he was 6 or 7 at the time. And he was kind of bored because it's all these athletes, but all these, older people and policy advisors. There was enough young people, though, that we wanted to entertain him, and we started playing with him. We threw the football around, had a good barbecue. So he didn't quite remember it. So I will say that he didn't quite. He's like, I didn't remember that, right? But I just got to get something from my nose here. 1 second, guys. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. So there he is. The kid went nuts on Bitcoin, and now the father, I was just told, I tried to get an interview with him to talk about Bitcoin because he hasn't made any public announcements Stephen Harper has on Bitcoin yet. But the fact that he has become a Bitcoiner, that his son is working in it, that he is totally open to it now, I think means that Polliver can't really get out of it. Right? Like he will still be influenced by this fella. It's very much and I guess, Harper, of all the leaders in Canada, still has a very powerful role, even though he's gone, and it's been many years that he's been gone. But the Conservatives didn't really want him to go. It was more that the fake news drove him out and made him probably a little crazy, right? He was still, in my opinion, cared about what the mainstream media said. I don't think he really understood the game that was going on, which is why I sort of went full Trump when Trump came out, because Trump was handling the media in a way that I recognized as being more, more payoff for confronting it that way. Anyway, let's get back to what Mike Benz says, right? So, let me just read these 2 other comments and I'll get back to it. That's quite a brush with history in 2016. It's the kind of thing I think is worth what-ifing about in order to do it. Yeah, Jeremy, I do. But look, I mean, he should have. At the minimum, he made a good part of the country a fringe minority that should not be tolerated. Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Anyway, he tried his best, Should have gone full Bitcoin. He had the chance. He had the chance, right? And I mean, we were only supposed to meet for an hour. I had him there for 2 hours. And I was not even being polite in the end. I was like, how can you even say you're a libertarian and you're not embracing Bitcoin? You think gold's coming back? We went right into it, Gold. Let's get some gold. It's great. All right. So here's what Mike Benz wrote. And remember, I've been talking about Mike Benz for a while now because this guy's absolutely blowing my mind, right? Absolutely blowing my mind. I think he has a better understanding of how this whole thing works than anyone. He's like the mechanic now for understanding how this fog of war machine works. So here's what he said, right? So go back to that first one, right? This was the headline that I had in our Moscow time. Disinformation research is buckling under GOP legal attacks in the Washington Post, right? We know where they lie in the whole pyramid scheme of disinformation. And he says, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen a more glorious headline and an opening paragraph in the Washington Post in your entire life, right? These disinformation organizations going down. So here's what he did, right? He broke it all down with 2 or 3 things, 2 or 3 stories that happened this weekend. First of all, the Russell Brand boycott in full speed, right? And he breaks it down. So it turns out that Burger King and a few others are done with Russell Brand and Rumble. So it's not just Rumble. It's not just Russell Brand. It's Rumble, right? So they're not doing it. They're pulling out. And Mike Benz says the following: it's not the woke companies. You got to understand, this is not wokeism, right? So here you get other people saying it's that woke companies, because of the charges against Russell Brand, it's all because of wokeism, right? So some people saying that. You've got Dan Bongino saying wokeism. You get a few people thinking it's wokeism. Mike Benz comes in and says not wokeism, right? Nothing to do with wokeism. This is because that's how this thing works, right? I think we can all agree that some of the goals of being woke are just about being courteous and thoughtful. Now, I don't mean logically and it's truthfully that. What I mean is that's what they're preying on. That's the conceit. That's the scam, right? That we all just need to be a little more considerate of people, which I think is actually true, right? Now, I can explain that from a Bitcoin time preference point of view, from a Bitcoin low time preference point of view. The world I want to see, the world that Bitcoiners are going to, right? The world that we're making will solve the wokeism problem this way. It won't be show me the average person, an average black person, and we'll make all the average people the same and these big systems. It's nothing to do with that, right? It's nothing to do with that. The black and the white thing is not even close to far enough, nor is the sexuality added on top of that. None of that is even close enough. In the end, you just have to treat each individual as an individual. That's it. And whatever that individual might need, might be lacking, might not have enough of, whether they're black or they're white. If we all take the time to listen and understand, you'll at least be able to send them in the right direction to get their help, right? But that's what it is. It is just a time preference problem. All this wokeism, Bitcoin will solve eventually just by lowering our time preference for having us treat every single individual as an individual, not a subset of categories and all these different things, black, lesbian, handicap. None of that will matter, right? It's whatever things that in the time that I took to get to know you, that I've observed you need in order to get forward and move forward in life, we'll all be able to help out and pitch in. And I think you can scale that around the world. I think you can scale that P2P consideration, the low time preference, taking the time, treating every individual as an individual, and being able to help them, right? If we all acted that way, we wouldn't have any of these troubles anymore. So this is all just to say that directionally, wokeism, I'm there and most Bitcoiners are there, right? In some sense, but it's just not even close to deep enough. It's still aggregating, making people parts of groups. None of that will matter. Individual considerations are all we'll need to do, which is really just a time preference argument. And we're going to get there, right? We're going to be able to treat every human and whatever their individual needs are. So what I mean to say is directionally, that's how the woke spell works, right? Most people do want to get to a point where every individual has the ability to be heard and have their problems listened to, and maybe get a bit of insight about how to solve them, right? So I think we're heading in that direction. It's not going to be institutions and people, and it's not going to be this ridiculous matrix and hierarchy of grievances and intersectionality and all of this stuff, which is a scam, right? So that's what he's saying here, right? He says this is not wokeism. It's not woke that's happening. It's not why these protests and boycotts are happening. He goes, this is literally military intelligence, and behind that, the corporate stakeholders of the foreign policy establishment's national security state battering ram, right? Ad boycotts are driven by economics, not ideology, right? And so he goes on, right? And he breaks out the entire way this stuff works, right? So now he's saying it's going to move to middleware, right? Now he's saying it's going to be moved to middleware. The middleware plan to restructure the censorship industry. Middleware equals censorship as a service organizations, morphing from top down to middle out. Regs and middleware will be a disinfo compliance market. So basically, it will be a compliance, like almost a KYC situation, spreading throughout our political discourse and thought, right? That's his take on it, right? So he goes into the details about the cutouts and the woke companies, right? He goes, I'm on your side. I don't like wokeism either. It sucks. But that's not what's driving internet ad boycotts, except a tiny little bit on the retail level fringes. If you misdiagnose the root cause, you misprescribe the needed solutions, right? So then he goes back to this old advertisement. Do you remember the Mikhail Gorbachev Pizza Hut advertisement? So I've been to Moscow. And I went to all of these restaurants when I was there, by the way. I went to the original McDonald's in Red Square. I went to the original Pizza Hut in Red Square. I went to all these places. Do you know that I actually snuck a cheeseburger from that McDonald's into Lenin's tomb and ate it in front of him? I pulled it out of my bag. Oh, it's a good burger, Lenin. It's real green. He's disgusting. Right? I snuck a McDonald's cheeseburger into that room, which was my own little fun thing to do, right? Little bratty thing to do. So that Pizza Hut ad, right? The Mikhail Gorbachev Pizza Hut ad, which happened when the Soviet Union fell, and he said, "Oh, we have Pizza Hut now in Russia." So Mike Benn says, and he copies that ad, and he says, or he tags the ad and retweets it, and he says, "Would you believe me if I told you the key to understanding why Burger King was successfully forced, and dozens more will be forced into ad boycotting Rumble by NATO intelligence cutouts is in this ad right here." So he's saying that Burger King's current boycott of Russell Brand, the origins of it can actually be seen in the Pizza Hut advertisement of Mikhail Gorbachev, and he breaks it down, right? He explains why. So he says that the noodles, right? So the Nan Noodles is a Soros organization, right? Soros built his, and they're the ones, I guess, deploying these ad dollars. Soros built his entire empire on the back of NATO, state, and UK Foreign Office. Since the 1980s, he's been the civil society arm of these CIA cutouts. After the fall of the Soviet Empire, he says, this is Soros's quote, "I picked up the pieces and created the Soros Empire." And he says, even this article about attacks the British government, Mike Benn says attacks the British government. So he's bringing back what I just mentioned, the NBC, the cutout itself, right? NBC, which he's going to describe here, even framing it as attacks the British government. So he says attacks the British government. Makes it sound like Russell Brand defending himself as a land invasion of London. NBC, of course, is one of the oldest Pentagon conduits. It grew out of the United Fruit Company, the Department of War's corporate sponsor in Latin America in 1926. Then in 1942, linked with the OWI. The United Fruit was the War Department's corporate sponsor in Latin America that managerially controlled so many countries with cover from the War Department and the State Department that the term Banana Republic comes from the United Fruit running third world government into the ground, right? So we all know that, right? The United Fruit Company turned into the actual Banana Republic origin story because that's what it was. It was this fruit company that was a cutout, right? So this cutout, and he goes into the details about what's happening with the Russell Brand piece and why it's like that. He says there is a 0% that Burger King dropped ads on its own. They were threatened and coerced by the State Department, the UK Foreign Office, NATO middleware censorship intermediaries like NewsGuard and Check My Ads. Check My Ads is a Soros organization, right? So that's what he's saying again. And it comes from his empire, right? And he says there is no such thing as misinformation research. It is just government-funded, government-coordinated censorship laundering, the entire field, top to bottom, right? So there's nothing about it that you should consider even legitimate, not even a little bit, right? So every little bit of the censorship industrial complex that comes from this misinformation research is a scam, without exception. So go back to this feeling of being duped again, right? This feeling of being duped that Viva Fry was mentioning, right? That all of these people being duped, getting duped is one of those things, and getting laughed at and mocked for being stupid and a moron is one of those things that can actually wake people up more than arguments, more than logic, and all of these things. And I continue to say that one of the most amazing parts of Bitcoin is that it actually does allow you the opportunity to wrap up everyone's failures, right? Everybody's failures, which are hard to look at. Like when you look at the Trudeau thing and you just want to be a good person and you voted for Trudeau because you thought it made you a good person and not like one of those nasty right-wing Trump bigot, racist, Nazi people. And now you find out that everything you thought was a lie because it's so shocking and you're getting mocked and laughed at. Now, I don't think, they're going to suppress this. They're obviously not going to turn it into a big issue. I hope they do, but it looks like it's going to be, it looks like it'll probably be squelched, which is what they're good at. But more and more people will wake up to what's going on. But here's the thing about the Bitcoin argument, right? Balaji tweeted this out this weekend. He said he's against war, right? Balaji says, I'm against war. Bitcoin is peace. Right? He says, I'm against war. Bitcoin is peace. And he followed it up with the following. And what I think is going to happen is, and I'll explain what you see here, what he quoted and why they're connected. I continue to believe that the cognitive dissonance created from realizing that you are actually one of the Nazis, that you weren't the Nazi fighter you thought you were one of the Nazis. One of the ways for people to excuse this away or to logic it out of their brain or to smooth it over for their own identity, no one's going to sit there and say, oh, I really wish I wasn't a Nazi anymore. I'm so repentant about being a Nazi once before. What a mistake, right? I didn't use my brain correctly and use my logic faculties correctly. It won't be that. It's not going to be that. They're going to need an excuse, right? They're going to need an excuse why they were duped, why they were lied to, and why they fell for it. And one of the greatest things we have in our favor is that the magic of fiat money to lie and deceive and to run these kinds of misinformation campaigns and to pay for the brainwashing required to make everyone applaud Nazis, right? That whole mess, how you end up having Canadian Parliament applauding Nazis, right, is because of the amount of psyops Americans and Canadians are being subjected to on a daily basis. And what is paying for those psyops is the never-ending stream of money. And so Balaji here breaks this all down, and he talks about how this disastrous situation has brought us to this moment. He says, I'm still amazed at how well the neocon, neolib playbook for permanent war continues to look. You'd think that after 20 years of disastrous conflict in the Middle East, after so many dead on all sides, the trillions wasted, the total to tactical and strategic defeat, that there would be some introspection, some calm, some voices for peace. Instead, the neocons just moved right along to confronting Russia and China at the same time. And the playbook is always the same. Wave the flag, denounce the traitors, and set up a juvenile binary. We need to fight them over there, or else we'll have them fight over here. But one didn't have to love Saddam or Gaddafi to know that the wars in Iraq and Libya would be disastrous. And one doesn't need to love Putin or Xi to know that the wars in Europe and Asia are disastrous. The US coexisted mostly peacefully with those guys for decades and could likely coexist for longer if it was if there was a will for it. After all, is anyone in the US still dead set on bringing democracy to the Middle East anymore? Yet, aren't many of those places still dictatorships? So it's managed to coexist. Indeed, to even negotiate the Abraham Accords, as it has managed to coexist with many Latin American, African, and Asian countries with different forms of governments. All of this is logical, but it falls on deaf ears. The incentives aren't there yet to stop the gears of the machine from working, right? So Balaji is correct about this, right? When he says that the war machine still allows for conjuring of ridiculous, hypnotic thoughts about what's going on, the good, bad binaries, the juvenile binaries, as he calls them, it's still there. But being mocked and made a laughing stock of the world, as Canada really ought to be, right? I've said it many times. Canada is filled with the dumbest people in the world, on the planet, right? On the planet. Now, the excuse I give them, and I think it's true, is that pound for pound and per capita, Canada has to deal with more brainwashing than the Americans. It's just an arms race, right? There's fewer Canadians, and there's almost a parallel wing to every single one of these American brainwashing cases. So pound for pound, per capita wise, Canadians happen to be in the crosshairs just more than anyone else, right? Just more than anyone else. We're just inundated. We're up to our eyeballs in the actual brainwashing soup that's thrown at us on a constant basis in Canada. And that has made the Canadian mind a little more broken than others. But the salvation for them, the way they can get out of this, is by simply saying, well, it was the money. It was always the money, which is both true, right, and allows you out of the prison of being hypnotized in this way in a manner that lets you keep a bit of your dignity, which is mostly what people want, right? People don't want to say, oh, I'm an idiot and I'm so stupid and how did I get fooled, right? It's going to make sense to people when they find out just how sophisticated the brainwashing machine has been and how subtle it was and how it could only work through the manipulation of money. That story alone is going to resonate in Canadians' minds, which will lead more and more Canadians to becoming Bitcoiners, I think, right? And even to this day, right here, we have the Vigilant Fox showing you what with the improper incentives, right? Incentives as they are, just as Balaji mentioned here, the incentives aren't there yet, right? The incentives aren't there to stop the gears, right? Well, look at already the cost of what's been suppressed just this week, right? This is the Vigilant Fox and what's been suppressed this week, right? So he does this every week. The media lies by omission. 10 stories they conveniently left out this week. Number 10, cattle are being injected with mRNA vaccines, but one beef rancher is taking a stand. Number 9, Carrie Lake makes a fiery accusation against Zelensky. Number 8, turbo cancers are targeting young people, and it's likely to get even worse. Number 7, top cardiologists break down 4 mechanisms of harm from COVID-19 shots before the European Parliament. Number 6, top data analysts make a chilling prediction on how the COVID conspirators will cover up their crimes. Number 5, the CDC dropped a bombshell on itself, exposing an alarming risk/benefit ratio. Number 4, brave EU politician delivers an explosive message to the global tyrants, telling them all to go to hell. So this was the Polish guy, right? Oncologist unveils why fasting for 48 hours is a potent therapy for COVID vaccine injuries. Number 2, fitness enthusiasts, not just athletes, are dying suddenly. Number 1, new found emails prove Biden White House hid COVID vaccine harms from the public. Now, how many of these stories are true? I have no idea. Maybe none of them, but we have no idea to even tell, right? I bet you maybe one of these stories is true. Maybe, right? But there is no incentive to even look into any of this stuff. It's all just lying, scamming, one on top of the other. It's all just fog of war and confusion. And you know, that's why you end up getting you know, did you see this weekend Hillary came in? Hillary's back, right? Hillary went into the Jen Psaki show. So Jen, you know, first of all, watching Jen Psaki and Hillary Clinton talk together, how much good can come of that, right? It's just spin doctors. Of course, she said Russia. She's back on the Russia collusion. 2016 is Russia interference. He's coming again to interfere. Putin is going to interfere in 2024, right? That's what he's around for. He's coming to do that. She says we got to be talking more about the Russia collusion hoax, right? got to talk more about the Russia collusion. He got away with it. There's no doubt he interfered. And Bowtied Bull, I think, put it this way. And I think it goes for Canadians, and I think it goes for Americans, and I think it goes for almost anyone else in the world. He says, the way to describe US culture is simple: no return. Once you realize this, the only way to prosper is by going niche, specific gated communities / enclaves, complete separation from the masses. If there is gang violence in the streets, do you jump in the center? No, you leave, right? And this is a bit about homeschooling, but really what I think he's saying is there is no way for people who know exactly how corrupted the military industrial complex is, the censorship industrial complex is. There is no way for anyone, once you see the incentives as they are, once you see the amount of damage being done by fiat money to pollute these systems so that we don't really know what's going on in the world, that we're listening to misinformation advisors who are paid to do misinformation. The minute we're in this spot, you can't actually go backwards, in the sense that the amount of Bitcoiners there are, the amount of people that know it's a scam in America have to all be killed. There's no other way. There's no other way. I've said it a million times, right? It won't be enough to kill Trump, right? People say, what if they kill Trump now? Okay. If they kill Trump, I think the day after, Kennedy just starts acting as if he's going to win, because at that point, there shouldn't even be a question, right? That everyone knows this is coming. Everyone wants to make sure that revenge would be gotten on the killers, on the assassins, right? And who else would you put in charge of that besides a guy whose own family was killed, who you could count on to carry out the finishing the job of cleaning up the mess? And it would have to keep going. They got to go to India and get Balaji next. Balaji's not going to stop, right? No one's stopping this. No one is going to stop. Therefore, there is no other way to see this global war that we're in other than simply a race to wear out the incentives on the other side, to break the incentives that allow for the disinformation machine to keep running, that allow for the hypnosis machine to keep running. But how much longer can it go for? Now that we actually know what it looks like. It used to be we were kind of guessing, right? We were a little bit blind. I would say I'm in the top, what percent of people who follow what's going on in the world. And I didn't know this kind of detail. And I was working at the executive level, the legislative level. There's no way you could have had more. There are few people that had experience at the executive branch, legislative branch, highest levels of state power of a G7 country, as well as the experience I had on Wall Street, right? With all of that, with the early Bitcoin stuff on Wall Street. There are very few people who had as bird's eye view as I had. And I didn't even know it was this bad, right? And I knew it was bad, right? I didn't think things were going great. Remember, I became a full-time Bitcoiner, 100% obsessed that Bitcoin was the only way 10 years ago. Not because I thought Bitcoin was so great, although I did. It really was because I knew I was desperate for a solution. There was no way out in the political sphere. I'd learned enough about the corruption of politics to know that we weren't going to fix the patient. The mind can't heal the mind. It was out of the government's hands. The problems were deeper than government. That's where it got into this world of time preference and understanding more about the psychological effects of money and what it had actually done. But the belief I had in Bitcoin at the time was already because I suspected things were bad. I had no idea how bad they really were. They're much worse than I thought 10 years ago. Much worse, much worse, right? But here we are running a actual fascist state inside of our own state, and calling ourselves the purveyors of democracy and all that stuff. It's grotesque. It's as grotesque as what we just saw in Canadian Parliament, and therefore it's a powerful enough spell. It's a powerful enough event to break the spell, I guess is what I'm saying, which is what we're here for, right? Which is what we're here for. Greg says, we're ready for the forgiven. Yeah, he's going to try. He's going to say that he's going to say, how much do you want to bet? He's going to say, I won't let people divide us. That's what he's going to say. I won't let right-wing conservatives divide us. That's what he's going to say. I won't let MAGA politics come to Canada. That's what he's going to say. I won't let MAGA come. Right? Right. There you go. There you go. All right, team. Let me know if I missed anything today or if we've got anything else to talk about. Where do I sats? Let me see what we got. Canada up in arms for Ukraine. Looking back, I used to watch these news magazine show without ever realizing that it was misinformation. Yeah. Terrible, AP man. We all did, man. We all did. But remember that feeling you have right now. I used to watch, can't believe it. Looking back, that is actually the key to hyper-Bitcoinization right there. That's the key to wholesale replacement of leadership structures and systems. That's it. The feeling you have when you regret, right there. That's what a bunch of Jewish people are about to experience in Canada. And it's going to be more and more and more and more and more, right? That's the good news. That is the good news. He's going to say, I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know. So good. We love it. We love it. All right, team. That's all I got for today. How good is that title today? Huh? How to not see a Nazi. All right. How to not see a Nazi. Denial. Yeah, that's the cognitive dissonance part, right? Is not just a reason. It's also the psychological fuel that allows fiat's ability to fund present military psychological attacks via fake news operations to continue lie and blind sheeple. Yeah. But less and less. How many Jewish people? First of all, the Dave Portnoy thing was big, right? The Dave Portnoy thing was big because you got the actual. Remember what I said about observing someone lie and what a superpower it becomes when you observe someone and you don't tell them, when you know they're lying and you observe it, and then you take a picture of that, you memorize the body language, the tells. You'll never forget it. That person will never be able to lie to you again. You'll know, right? Everyone lies the same way. Everyone lies their own way, but the same way perpetually. The people have their own idiosyncratic ways of lying. And if you know one of the greatest superpowers you get, now be careful to do this with someone you love and want to be with. Don't just go and do this willy-nilly with your significant other, because you're going to know, right? You can't unsee it. So be careful with this piece of information, but it works. And what we saw with the journalist straight up lying is you see how natural it was for her, how easy it was, and how weak her excuses were, and how easy it is to tell she's lying. So that was a big deal, right? The Russell Brand thing came right around the same time. So between Russell Brand and Dave Portnoy, and now this Nazi thing, right? We're in a great position to see exactly how the sausage is made. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So it's either mass killings, which some people believe is in our future, right? If you listen to what Cernovich and others are saying, Spain and Russia come to mind. But it's not that. And we have Bitcoin and we have guns. It's guns and Bitcoin. So, I got my plans. I know what I'm doing. All right. QAnon and Wayfairgate helped me see through the bullshit. Seeing the thing they were covering up and what they used. Yeah, the Wayfair thing is really, really tough to look at, Tommy. Really tough. Don't like it, but true. Lie to me, baby. Lie to me. Yeah. All right, team. Peace. Have a great day, everyone. I shall see you all tomorrow for more of the funniest news we're going to find. We love it. Peace.